Guys, let's get ready, get settled in. We're going to have another lecture today. You're going to need your notebooks with you wherever you take notes. If it's right on the same computer, that's fine too. You can watch this with a friend, but you got to take your own notes on this, or you got to put this in your own words, or it's not really going to make as much sense to you. I still got my sinus infection here, so bear with me. Chapter 16, we already talked about Gilded Age technology and how much the world has progressed because of that. And we talked a little bit about how rough business was on workers and for people that lived at this time period. We also hit on immigration. This chapter is really going to focus on politics, okay? Hence Gilded Age Politics. Now I'm going to stay zoomed out like this. I'm not going to present, but you should still be able to see everything that we're going through here. And I'm also going to be skipping a lot, so you're not going to need to know everything that I go through, that we do on this. Alrighty, let's load here. Alright, here we go. Cool. So, as you can see on the right hand side, I've included comments. Comments are always going to be definitions of words, and they're always going to be in order. So this one's going to go to the first word. Second one's going to connect to the second word on the page. That might seem like a new word to you. So let's get started. Gilded Age Politics. Before we get started here, let's just note that when the country's founded, we have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists are talking about a strong central government, and Anti-Federalists are talking about the Bill of Rights, and we need to keep things local so we can protect individual rights. So those are our two arguments. Federalists see it as we need a strong central government to protect rights. Anti-Federalists say we need stronger local governments like state governments to protect rights. Then we kind of meld. Once we get the Constitution set here, we really don't need Federalists versus Anti-Federalists because we've created a federal government. So since that's not needed anymore, we end up getting parties, and lots of different parties. We have a Whig party that comes along, and literally they wear white wigs. And we have the Democratic Republican Party. And in case you didn't guess it, that party ends up splitting up to becoming what the parties we have today, the Democrats and the Republicans. And we're actually going to see that split in today's conversation. So, biggest hit home for you is that just as business seemed really corrupt from our conversation on Tuesday, politics are also very corrupt. What does corruption mean? Dishonest or fraudulent conduct, okay? Not being a good guy. So, powerful special interests. Special interests in this case means businesses, really. Lots of big businesses. They're looking for money. So they're getting into the politics game so they can make themselves more money. So, despite all of this, though, don't worry about this fancy word, despite the corruption, they actually do pass some good reforms to make for more active government. However, big issue at this time period, these people are excluded from vote or from access. We also call this disenfranchisement. We're going to see that later on. Women, people of color, recent immigrants, and the poor. None of these people can vote yet, okay? In the 1890s, because of all of this tension, we talked about union politics, union protests, now we've got political corruption. Because of all this turmoil and dissent, we see a lot of dissent just explode in the 18th. It'll get us into our next unit, the Progressive Era, where we see a lot of action from groups that were previously not represented, like these guys, these ladies here. So dissent, just in case you didn't know, hold or express opinions that are different or vary with those previously common. So holding a different opinion. Alrighty, let's move on here. So the nature of party politics. We have, despite all this corruption, we actually have everybody who can vote is pretty much participating. 80% of people that are eligible to vote are voting, which is pretty remarkable. Today, we see numbers less than 50%, sometimes 30%, even at presidential election time. Presidential election time is when we get the most people voting. Congressional elections get fewer votes than that. So Senate and House get fewer than that. And then state and local elections get even fewer people than that. And not just because our population size is decreasing, we're talking percentage of the vote here. So we're talking like 10, 12, 20% max in some cases. So that's something that you and I got to work on in the next few years. You guys got to get voting, okay? You got to be using the rights that you're given. But anyway, that's a little soapbox for you. So the way that party politics works is they're doing very social things. So they're going out and doing parades and meeting all the people. And they're having picnics. By the way, they used to have picnics in cemeteries at this time. Ask me about it. Really creepy stuff, right? So they're doing all this community outreach stuff. When I say to you, you need to shake hands and kiss babies, they're literally doing that at this time period. Okay, they are shaking hands and kissing babies. So politics reflect pluralism. So let's look at what that means. A condition or system in which two or more states, groups, principles, sources of authority coexist. I don't know why the T is missing there. Sorry about that. So pluralism means coexistence. So party politics in this time period isn't about fighting and battling against the other guy. It's actually about working together to get what you need and what you want. However, they do compete for power. So in order to get that power, they want to reflect the ideas of different groups to bring those guys into the fold. They form fragile coalitions between each other that unite. It's very fragile. So like, for example, Protestants, which were at the time period were Republican, advocated government-enforced morality or Sabbath laws. So a law about, not working on Sundays would be a Sabbath law, right? And they're pushing for this, and they align themselves with other groups in order to get that passed. To get that passed, immigrants are typically Democratic, and they significantly oppose that. Why? Because they don't have the same religions as we initially had in the country. So this is just some of the conversation that we're having. To note over here, look at my little thought bubbles I have for you. So note, at this time period, Democrats and Republicans are not different parties, and that's why I'm saying fragile coalitions. This is very precarious. We're going to see that explode pretty soon. Okay. As soon as my page will load. Here we go. All right, party factions. So a faction is a piece of a party, right? A part of the pie. And so that's what I'm talking about in my thought bubble on the previous page here, right? So these little sections of a party are called factions of the party. So right now, Tea Partyists are a faction of the Republican Party. So surprisingly, even when these factions are corrupt, politicians evoke or bring about really strong supporter loyalty. People are really steadfast and strongly loyal to their candidates. We have this like equilibrium until about 1890. And what I mean by that is equal. Like all parties at this time period, they're not dominating. There's no one party that's more powerful than another. They are peacefully coexisting. It's truly pluralism, if I ever did see it. But within the parties that are not dominating, we have lots of factions that are divisive, that are divided. Both pursue lots of spoils. Both parties are corrupt. They use voter fraud. So they, like people who are dead, they'll take their names and put votes in for them. And at this time period, it's very difficult to keep lists of those who have passed away, especially in the last year. But at the state level, one party usually does dominate, and we usually get what they call the dictatorial boss, but it's a senator that really controls the party at that level. All right, we're going to skip over this stuff, I think. Okay, so let's look at activism and government a little bit. We've talked about railroads some, so I want to talk about them just a little bit more. Railroads were, because business was free and open to do whatever it wanted, they would give low rates to people who wanted long hauls, so a haul from Iowa to New York, say, but charge high rates for short hauls, so a haul from, say, Buffalo, New York to Albany, New York. That's about 5 hours, okay? By car, driving like me, and I'm a crazy driver. So farmers are outraged by this because, farmers in Buffalo shouldn't be paying more to haul to Albany than farmers in Iowa hauling to Albany, because hauling from Iowa to Albany obviously costs more money for the railroad. So Farmers lobby for regulation. States pass some regulations on this, but the Supreme Court actually voids them. In citing that the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution, interstate commerce is to be dealt with by the federal government. So the Interstate Commerce Act is established, and it bans this discriminatory rates. So we do see our government, even though it's really corrupt, making significant action. That doesn't seem big, but because they make this, it changes legislation for everybody who's working in between the states. Alrighty, we're going to skip over veterans' pensions, but just know that even veterans of the Civil War are exploiting the memory of the Civil War, and they're lobbying for pensions to get retirement and stuff like that. Okay, civil service reforms. This part of government is truly, truly corrupt. It's a big deal. Basically, presidents and everybody else in power were giving jobs to their buddies and their friends and their brothers. And this is called, when you do that, it's called nepotism. Instead of choosing a candidate that actually knows what they're doing, you choose somebody that's your friend. It's called nepotism. So the Pendleton Civil Service Act, the government actually passes this, good and fair. This comes after Grant scandals, Garfield's assassination. Lincoln's been assassinated already, by the way. Then we get Andrew Johnson, who's his VP, comes in. Then we have Grant come in after him, and then Garfield. So after these things, we say, hey, you know what, all these scandals and whatnot, we really, really need to protect this a bit more. Government needs to get a bit more legit. So basically, the Pendleton Civil Service Act says you basically have to prove that you can do this job. We start getting civil service tests, competitive tests, to make sure that whoever's getting the job knows what they're doing. We'll skip that. We're going to skip that. Okay, here we go. Let's look at presidential initiative. So, basically, Johnson gets impeached because he decides to ignore some laws passed by Congress. And so they say, hey, that's illegal, you can't do that. So they put him up on trial. And he ends up getting booted. So Johnson's impeachment's actually successful in our history. Ulysses S. Grant is actually benefiting from Johnson. What Johnson wants to do is he wants to kick some guy out of office. The Congress says you can't do that. That's why he gets impeached. But when he kicked the guy out of office, he puts Ulysses S. Grant in power. And Grant's like, ooh, I need to get off this, death train right now. So when he steps down from his position during this scandal, everybody is really happy with him. And so the Republican Party gets really, really happy about this. And they start pushing Ulysses S. Grant for president. But when Grant gets in power, he's just as corrupt as the last guy. He uses the spoils system, all sorts of scandals to just get rich quick. And because of these scandals, because of Johnson's impeachment, because of a really rough election in '76, we have this push to try and restore the presidency that once looked so great with Lincoln and Washington, that now looks so corrupt, and people are so disappointed in it. So Hayes, Garfield, and Arthur really try and push that. So they initiate some reform laws. They use their veto power more to strengthen the power of the presidency. So that's pretty significant stuff. By the way, because of these scandals that Grant has, the Democratic Party decides to split from the Republican Party and make their own, because the Republican Party is pushing for Grant. They like Grant a lot. The Dems are like, you know what? We don't need all this corruption. Alrighty, we're going to skip those guys. Okay. Discrimination and disenfranchisement. If you take anything away from this presentation, take two things. Take one, party politics, hugely corrupt. It starts out pluralistic. Things are very equal. Then we move into a really aggressive, active political party system, and we have parties that are really competing against one another constantly. Dems and Republicans start competing for power pretty aggressively to the point where we see it today. The second thing you take out of this presentation is disenfranchisement. Who is not given their rights as citizens, right? So if we look at this, I don't have it highlighted here, I have it on the next page. But if we look at this, we see Poor whites are fearing competition from blacks after their emancipation from the Civil War. In 1880, we have 90% of blacks in agriculture and domestic service, and that quickly changes as we start getting all this factory business, as I was saying on Tuesday, and African Americans start